Raise some
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome to the Raising Cain Show. I'm Nate Cain, your host. Tonight we have a really special guest, a friend of mine, somebody who I met in this, during the time of this COVID experience, and really, informed me about the kinds of things that were going on. He's a medical doctor. His name is Dr. Chris Clagett. He's a retired Preventive medical officer with the U.S. Navy. Having an impressive 34-year career, his experience spans operational medicine with infantry and artillery in Fleet Marine Force and with coastal and riverine forces. As a preventive medicine physician, Dr. Clagett brings extensive knowledge of the immune system and the science behind preventive medicine. He is known for his work in evaluating the risk-benefit profile of COVID vaccines within the military population. In addition to his medical expertise, Dr. Clagett has signed the Military Accountability Initiative alongside myself, advocating for transparency and accountability in military healthcare. With that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Chris Clagett. So thank you, Chris, for joining us. And
pleasure.
Really happy to have you on. We've done a quite long, Spaces interview where we got into a lot of research. And so this will be a little bit of a different show. And so I'm really looking forward to it. But to give a little background about the military accountability documents that you and I signed on, we were both original signers of that document. And for those of you that want to look into that, you can find out more about it by going to militaryaccountability.com. And the site it has a declaration basically where we have committed ourselves to exposing the truth and holding those accountable, for forcing this unauthorized and illegal vaccine on our military troops. And so we'll get into that a little bit later tonight. But one of the reasons, Chris, that I wanted to have you on is there's been some really some recent studies that have come out that I thought were very pertinent to exposing some of the things that I think, the media and the drug companies have been wanting to hide, and our government. And so, it's kind of like there was a recent study, especially one that got into exposing causality of death. I think especially like cardiac related deaths and the vaccines. And this was a study that was peer reviewed but originally was published in the Lancet Journal, and then the Lancet Journal took it down like within 24 hours. But it ended up getting peer reviewed and published, and so now they can't hide it. And so I'm really curious. I can read a study like that, and as somebody who's not a medical professional and not a scientist, I'm limited in my understanding of these things. I think one of the things that I learned in going through looking at some of these studies before with you, is that there are some studies where the research is better than in others. Where they do like, maybe they do a study of like Worcester rats or something, but it's not a human study, or they do a meta study where it's looking at a lot of data. And so, or you have something research that's peer reviewed versus research that's not peer reviewed. For the average layman, they may not understand those differences and what makes a study a really good study versus one that's kind of poorly done. But it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, is because I wanted to get your opinion on this. And I would like, I wanted to have you take a look at it and, extrapolate from it, things that maybe the average person might not see. And then also too, I know you keep up on all the latest and greatest of what's going on with a lot of these things. And so there may be things that studies I haven't even seen or heard about. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity for the first half hour to get into some of that. And then the second half hour, we're going to talk about the impacts of this to, military readiness, and specifically getting into the DMA. So with that, Chris, I gave you a short introduction. If there's anything else that you'd like to bring up or mention about yourself and your background, this would be a good opportunity. And then I'll let you get into talking about these studies.
Sure. So my background, as you know, is preventive medicine, which one of our major tools is epidemiology. Now, I don't consider myself a high-end statistician, an epidemiologist. There are different kinds of studies where you really do need very sophisticated sampling techniques. But for the vast majority of epidemiologic work, just properly collected basic statistics, with descriptive statistics of trends of illness by person, place, and time is more than adequate. And probably more than 95% of important questions can be answered with basic but properly collected data. And you talked about recent studies, and I will get to the McCullough study of over 300 autopsies. But there was another study that was just published, and it was looking at 16 outcome indices related to government responses to the pandemic, and the data collected were across 181 nations. And the authors failed to find that there was any benefit. Now, on its face, this is a little bit embarrassing to governments, but we do need to keep in mind there's a problem, because the data that these investigators collected, as I said, 181 different nations, different countries do not count things the same. And that creates a phenomenon that we call reporting bias. There are two forms of reporting bias, whereas, you can have, say, within the United States. So, it's our government, it's our data, but maybe we change our procedure between time 1 and time 2. So the methods of counting will be different. Or you can compare, say, two different countries at the same time, and because they use different methods to count the same thing, you have reporting bias. For example, homicide. In the United States, we will call a death of a person that is clearly not due to natural causes. We may not have the perpetrator involved, or who is responsible involved, but not due to natural causes, and not due to accident, that's a homicide. In the UK, they not only need a perpetrator, you need a conviction in a court of law before a death will be classified as a homicide. So in the UK, you have a rather large fraction of deaths that are classified as unexplained. And unexplained in the UK really means we don't know who did it. It wasn't natural, old age, heart attack. It wasn't an accident. Stepped in front of a motor vehicle, fell off a ladder, fell out of a third-story window, not pushed. But we don't know who did it. In the UK, that's unexplained. That's not a homicide. So we have reporting bias, and of course you can see where that goes.
Well, with the COVID deaths, some examples of reporting bias that I remember was they had there was an example of a man who was decapitated in a freak work accident down in Florida, and but he happened to have COVID, and
but
so
he
they
tested
reported.
positive.
That's right. He tested positive for COVID, so they said he died of COVID. That was what they claimed because they made money if he died of COVID. And
That's right.
so, that would be an example of, I guess, an over-reporting, right?
Yes.
But then you also had, examples of where somebody died of COVID, but maybe it wasn't the COVID that killed them. Maybe it was a complication related to the vaccine. And so that's kind of where this study is really getting into, because in this case, they were looking at the autopsies.
Yes.
And looking at the actual causality of death. And it did not look like it was COVID itself that killed the person, but rather a complication, as a result of the mRNA, vaccine and the excessive spike proteins and damage done to the heart, and specifically,
and various systems.
Yes, that's right. So that I think is one of the things that unfortunately we won't know the full extent of this possibly for years, because it's just like you don't know somebody's exposure to something and then all of a sudden 20 years later everybody's getting cancer. And that's another thing too, like there's all of these what do they call them, basically rapid cancers that are developing that are rare and unusual. That they're not.
The term is turbo cancer.
Turbo cancer. Thank you. And so that's another thing too. That is, it's not a perfect. There's not a perfect way to say, this turbo cancer, we've 100% can say it came from this. But when you see that there's a massive uptick in turbo cancer, correlative data, right? You can say, well, what occurred that now we're all of a sudden seeing this? And the only thing that seems to be a consistent thing in all of these cases is these people, being exposed to the mRNA vaccine. And we had a long show on this about getting into, how the booster shots affected the immune response. And so, I'll let you, talk more about that. But I think that is a possibility of what we're seeing now is, as a relation to, people's immune systems not responding the way they should to things like cancer cells.
There's an interesting, the epidemiology, the current epidemiology of cancer is a little bit complicated. So normally, across human life, cancer has two peaks: early childhood, and that peak attenuates off by, I think, age 10, certainly by 12. So, and then cancer occurs at a very low level throughout life. You get sporadic. It's like fireflies going off in the night, across life. And then as we get older, cancer begins to ramp up again and increasing with increasing age. With the 2020 the new virus on the street. The aged in the population were depleted. In fact, 2018 and 19 were mild influenza years. So we had what is epidemiologically called dry tinder. It's basically people who had escaped common causes of death in old age in 2018-19, who were still around in 2020, and they were the low-hanging fruit for the virus. These are the exact same people that had the Chinese Frankenvirus not come along, probably would have contributed to a slightly worse than average influenza season in 2020.
Right. Yeah, because there was almost an exact correlation between less numbers and people dying, due to the flu, but dying, due to COVID, right?
And some of those may very well have been misclassification, and they
True.
may have been in fact influenza. It's really hard to get clear data on the performance
Yeah.
of these the PCR tests.
Right. Well, I think what's been more disturbing, at least, look, we expect that, elderly people who have a compromised immune system, that they are at risk, right? But what has been shocking to me is the number of like athletes who have died on the field, young people, like 5-year-olds having heart attacks, something I'd never even heard of ever happening before, before the COVID injection. These kids that are in the basically the prime of their life dropping dead, due to, some cardiac arrest. That just doesn't happen. It never happened before this.
No. But let's
I cannot remember a single incident ever in my life. I'm sure there was one, but I never heard it of a child having a heart attack.
Let's stay with for a minute or two with cancer epidemiology.
Sure.
So normally it is the aged that account for the bulk of cancer cases. But in 2020, we depleted that segment of the population. But nevertheless, in 2021 and 2022, and I'm not sure about 2023, I don't think I've seen those data, we're still seeing an uptick in cancer mortality. Mm-hmm. And if you tease the data apart, because CDC has not done that, they're lumping it all. But if you tease it apart, the real increase in cancer is in the young, who mm-hmm. normally do not get cancer at high rates. But in fact, for any of the audience that is familiar with the standard deviation, 4 standard deviations would be like a 1 in 10,000 part, probability. We are seeing a more than 12, 15 standard deviations increase in cancer among the young. And the only reason there's room for that large a statistical increase is because the young adult population, really from the mid-teen years on up through the young adult population, they get cancer at such a low rates that that there's even room to have such an enormous statistical increase. And this increase, even with the reduction in the cancer among the elderly, still accounts for an uptick in the overall cancer rate in the population. Mm-hmm. And we're having a very similar thing with cardiovascular death. Mm-hmm. You're saying, okay, the elderly get this kind of mortality. It happens, but the real news is among the young.
Right.
And this is vaccine is the term they use, but
it's not really a vaccine.
In 2018 and 2019, Moderna and Pfizer both characterized their products as gene therapy. They had to, until 2020, when FDA waved their administrative law wand and changed the definition of the term vaccine, so that in 2020, late 2020, Pfizer and Moderna could roll out their products as vaccines. But they don't resemble any historical vaccine. They're not
Right.
killed whole virus. They're not attenuated live virus. They're not fragment of virus. They're not, what other options do we have? Well, really, those are the three big generations of antiviral vaccine technology. They're not any of those. It's a full functional gene that codes for a 1200 amino acid protein, full functional protein. It's a gene. And it commandeers your cellular machinery, or the vaccinee's cellular machinery. You didn't get it. Commandeers the vaccinee's cellular machinery to make this foreign protein that invites immune system attack down upon every cell that does this, until so much is made that the immune system gives up.
Right.
And it does give up.
Right. Because a normal, in a normal human being's body, where you contract the virus, your immune system's going to go at it and kill it. And eventually it's going to wipe it out. Whereas with this, your RNA is essentially being turned into a factory just to keep producing it. And so it never really stops until basically your immune system says, oh, well, this must be something normal, so I'm going to ignore it.
Let's tease apart. There's 2-3 things there that need to be teased apart.
Okay.
First, so when you get a virus, the virus invades your cells, commandeers the cellular machinery to replicate itself and make more virus, because it can't do it on its own. So the immune system, very sophisticated, it has multiple mechanisms to detect virus-infected cells, and we kill those cells, destroy them. And that's how we shut down viral replication. We sacrifice a few cells for the sake of the rest of the body, and we shut down viral replication. Now, normally when you make RNA, and you're making it all the time, that RNA has a very short life inside the cell. In fact, it'll go out from the nucleus, it'll pass through a ribosome, but the cell has these enzymes called nucleases floating around, and they immediately degrade that RNA, and that's how the cell controls how much proteins are produced. So that RNA, messenger RNA, has a very short half-life. It may go through the ribosome only one time before it gets degraded. If the cell wants more of that protein, it sends out another mRNA. But the Pfizer and Moderna products, they took all the uracil and they substituted this thing called 1-methyl-pseudouridine in there, which your nucleases do not recognize, so that modified RNA can cycle through the ribosome again and again and again. It has been detected in vaccinated subjects up to 187 days after vaccination. So it's going through for 187 days, is cycling through the ribosome and creating copies of the spike protein. And then, so there was one other thing, and I lost track of it. Sorry.
It seems to me like that kind of technology would be useful in biological warfare.
Yes. Yes.
Right? Like if you wanted to,
you induce the body to create a foreign protein that invites immune self-attack, and with the lipid nanoparticle carrier, it is capable of invading every tissue in the body, including the brain, which is a very privileged organ and protected by what's called the blood-brain barrier. But these
Right.
lipid nanoparticles slide right through the blood-brain barrier and enter brain cells.
There's another barrier too, and that's the placental barrier, which they've detected that it's able to get past. And so pregnant women who are carrying a child, normally the fetus is protected, from the mother's blood having some sort of infection or whatever. But this is able to get through that, and they've found there's been a massive uptick statistically in the number of stillborn births and miscarriages. And in fact, this was one of the things, I can't remember her name, but she was the head of, I want to say it was the CDC or one of these governmental agencies, and or NIH or something, but she ignored the internal research from Pfizer that showed massive, increases in stillbirth and in miscarriages, and gave it the go-ahead, to approve, pregnant women, getting vaccinated. I mean, to me, that kind of malfeasance is criminal, and
Yes.
she should be in prison for that. Walensky, I think, was her name.
Yes, she was the CDC director at the time.
That's right.
The distinction between miscarriage and stillbirth is 20 weeks. Prior to that, it's miscarriage. After that, stillbirth. And one of the sleights of hand that Pfizer did was that they included all women vaccinated during pregnancy in their miscarriage calculation. The problem with that method is that women who lose the fetus after 20 weeks have not had a miscarriage, or have not had a miscarriage. That's right. They have not had a miscarriage. They've had a stillbirth. So they inflated the denominator by including pregnant women who should not have been included. If you take those women back out and you include in the denominator only the women who were actually injected during the first trimester, the miscarriage rate goes to, I think it's 10 or 11% for Pfizer and 14% for Moderna. And the historical miscarriage rate for pregnant women is 5%. Now,
It doubles their chances, or more than doubles their chances.
And CDC, now it is CDC that is playing fast and loose by gaslighting the public on what the historical miscarriage rate was.
Right.
They're saying, oh no, it's 15%. So there's no change.
Right. And that is a like textbook definition of denying somebody informed consent.
Yes.
When you don't inform a patient of the risks involved in taking something to their own child they're carrying.
Yes.
On that note, and I want to just touch on this just briefly here. We had talked about in our X spaces about that the one human organ that seemed to be more prone to storing the spike protein than any other was the female ovary.
Correct.
Has there been any significant research that's come out to confirm what many suspected, would happen, which would be a drop in fertility of women due to the COVID vaccine? Has there been any research on that?
Depends on what you call research. So officially, people looking into it, researchers at medical universities, not that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
What has happened is that people are looking at governments, various governments, ours, UK, good data out of Australia, I think, New Zealand, Germany. Germany has has good data on fertility. And what we're seeing is across multiple countries, we're seeing a 10 to 12% reduction in the birth rate.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, and these are not governments analyzing their own data. These are private citizens using their government's FOIA or equivalent, Freedom of Information Act equivalent statutes to get a hold of the government data, and then they're crunching the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the one end, we're seeing a 10 to 12% reduction in birth rates. And on the mortality side, we're seeing about a 15% increase in all-cause mortality, which is very peculiar. And the level of denial in I'm going to say practicing physicians in this country is just breathtaking. I had an online argument with a guy who a doctor, an MD, who runs an online medical education website, who told me, he's in Utah, who told me that the Utah state data show that the gene injections are associated with a decrease in all-cause mortality. He said this with a straight face. He was very serious. I need to explain why this is so spectacular. So let's say the Pneumovax against Streptococcus pneumoniae. We give it to elderly people in hopes that they will have a decreased risk for pneumonia. Let's say it's a successful vaccine. What you would expect to see is that vaccinated elderly people have less community-acquired pneumonia than unvaccinated elderly people. That would be a successful vaccine. But what his claim is equivalent to is saying that we immunize elderly people against Streptococcus pneumoniae, and not only does it protect against strep pneumoniae, but it also protects against heart attack and cancer and every other cause of death that might usher someone out of this mortal coil.
Mm-hmm.
That makes no sense. None at all. Whereas what we're seeing is these gene injections, which we know penetrate every tissue in the body. We are seeing people die of non-COVID causes, and the UK data are especially beautiful. Well, from an epidemiologist standpoint, it's a tragedy, really. What they show is that the vaccinated at every level of vaccination, 1 shot, 2 shot, 3 shots, more than 3, every level, they account for a disproportionate amount of all-cause mortality, and the unvaccinated are a disproportionately small amount of all-cause mortality. It's the shots.
Mm-hmm. I want to real quick just touch on something. We've got this is kind of interesting. When we do these shows, we stream it to Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, X, and what's fascinating is in almost all of the shows that I do, I have some viewers on Facebook and YouTube that will watch. On this show, 0, meaning they're blocking it. We've got over 1,000 viewers right now live watching the show. and 100% of them are on X. That should tell you something about, the involvement of these companies in disinformation, misinformation, and basically censorship in keeping, so far we haven't made any claims here that aren't backed up by scientific journals and research, peer-reviewed research. Nothing we've talked about is making claims that are not backed by science. And yet you've got Facebook and YouTube basically completely censoring this topic. So I find that interesting. It seems to me, that it is, it's almost on the level of it's not just them, it's also the mainstream media. We saw that happen all the time. That study that I had referred to earlier, I went and I looked and you can't hardly find it if you try to Google it. The only thing that you find is fact check study does not say COVID vaccines may have fueled excess death. But then you start looking through their fact check and it's just full of holes. And it's some, I guarantee you the people who are doing the fact check aren't scientists and they're not doctors. And that has been, and that's Reuters. So, but this has been the problem all along, is that there's been a massive cover up of all of this, including what they've done to our military and, by forcing the vaccine on them as well. And we need to cut to a commercial break to give our sponsors a word. And then we're going to come back from that. And I want to talk more about specifically the harm that has happened in the military and the, subsequent cover up of what the Pentagon has done in regards to this. And we'll get into military accountability. So,
Look forward to it.
Yep. So folks, we will be right back after these messages.
Not believe, no detergent, no hot water, no fabric softener. Now you even threw away all the chemicals to clean your home. I don't need to buy sprays to cut through grease. I don't need to buy window cleaners. I don't need to buy carpet shampoo. I don't need to buy things to mop my floor. I don't need to buy things to take pesticide off my vegetables, fruits, and fish. Oh my gosh, where did this come from? I'll tell you where it came from. It came from hospitals. This is actually a photo of a huge commercial hospital laundry technology that cost in excess of $100,000 if you bought that whole thing, and it'll fill up your garage. That's how big it is. And what we've done with the advent of microelectronic technology, my team and I constantly use microtechnology just like your smartphone. The new EcoWasher SE is a chemical-free laundry and cleaning solution. Imagine, no more detergent, no more chemicals, saves you money, pays for itself, gives you a healthier life, and simplifies doing laundry. And now we're going to include 2 free ThunderPure Safe Air Minis that purifies your home and sanitizes your surfaces like a thunderstorm in nature, eliminates all odors. Plus, you're receiving $100 off by using code PODCAST on the new EcoWasher SE. Let me remind you, 2 free ThunderPure Safe Air Minis plus $100 off during this podcast. Podcast is your coupon code at Eco.
Military use when they need unlimited power during critical missions. Civilians like you can now get their hands on the exact same technology within 24 hours for pennies on the dollar. Folks, as a former infantry soldier, I can tell you this is the best and cheapest way to get reliable, unlimited energy. And no, I'm not talking about regular generators or the expensive solar panels. You don't have to be an electrician to do it. There's no maintenance needed. It doesn't take up a lot of space. And the best part, you won't need to rely on the power grid anymore. Click below now and hit play.
Born in the coastal plains of South Texas, Smoking Gun Coffee is founded by combat veterans that know exactly what a cup of coffee needs to taste like. Run by father and son, each coffee bean is perfected, roasted at 500 degrees and cooled with a Gulf Coast breeze. Smoking Gun Coffee hand makes and bags each ounce of coffee for maximum customer satisfaction. With every purchase, 10% goes back to organizations that help veterans and local communities. That's Texas made, one bag at a time. To find out more, go to www.smokingguncoffee.com.
Welcome back to the Raising Cain Show. I'm here with our guest, Dr. Chris Clagett. And we've been talking about the vaccine and some of the problems that have been covered up and are now beginning to get exposed. The first half hour, we were really getting into that, but I want to give some time specifically to talk about how this has impacted our military readiness, what has happened to many of our soldiers. My understanding is there's a different database that's maintained for monitoring, this type of stuff within the military, and also, talking about the Declaration of Military Accountability, and both Dr. Clagett and myself are original signers of this document, and so we're going to get into that in this second half of the show. I think this is such an important issue that we may go a little bit over on time here, and so just want to prepare folks for that. But I do think this is an important topic. So Chris, tell us about what you've seen in terms of what happened with the military, and particularly explain the differences between what occurred in the military versus what, say, the average civilian, dealt with regards to the vaccine.
So the medical effects are the same, but in the military, a member is trained and educated to follow orders. There's a complication that the order must be lawful. Now, junior people, although they get annual education in what is a lawful order, you can have lots of gray areas, and I can say a medical treatment, like a purported immunization, would be one of those areas where they don't know that a lawful or an order is unlawful. Most of the listeners may remember back in 2003, actually even before that, the anthrax immunization program and the smallpox immunization program. We don't have time here to go into the details of that, but one of the fallouts of those controversies was that DOD wrote into its own regulations, and the government wrote into federal law, the Congress wrote into federal law, that military members could not be required to take any drug or biological product that was not fully FDA approved. EUA does not cut it.
EUA being Emergency Use Authorization, for those that don't know that acronym.
Right. And to force a member to do this is essentially a felony. So the military vaccine mandate, to put vaccine in quotes, the military vaccine mandate was legally worded, that we would use FDA products, but there was a FDA approved products, but there was a bait and switch. The only FDA approved product was Pfizer's Comirnaty. And Pfizer only made enough doses of Comirnaty for their phase 2-3 trial, efficacy trial. Comirnaty was never offered to the public. It was never offered to the military. Instead, they switched to another product that they made jointly with BioNTech that was just known by its nomenclature, BNT162B2. That product only had EUA approval by FDA. So with only emergency use authorization approval, it could not legally be forced on military members, but it was. DOD went through basically some sleight of hand saying, well, they're legally equivalent. No, they aren't. In fact, to show you how not equivalent they are, when FDA approves a biological product, and almost all vaccines, true vaccines, are biological products, not only does it approve the product, the end product, and not only does it approve the process by which the product is made, but it even approves the plants at which the product is made. And the plants have to show that they're using good manufacturing practices in order to make the product.
Make sure things aren't getting contaminated and whatnot.
And the reason Pfizer made the switch is because the very pure polymerase chain reaction process that they used to create Comirnaty could not be scaled up industrially to make the tens and hundreds of millions of doses that they needed for worldwide distribution. So they switched to a different process that involved, I'm going to boil this down. They stuck DNA into E. coli bacteria. They forced the E. coli bacteria to produce large quantities of messenger RNA. But it was a very dirty process, and that's where all the adverse reactions come from. Although there were adverse reactions in the very pure product that was Comirnaty,
that's like the difference, though, between adverse reactions that come from long-term exposure versus the people who had immediate adverse reactions where, that was caused by something wrong in the process of making this. Like they got a dirty product, basically.
Well, even the clean product had enormous problems. As you know from the data, they had to hide the miscarriage rate.
Right.
So even the clean product had enormous problems. Making the dirty product that became BNT162B2, which was distributed worldwide, only amplified those problems. We don't have time to go into them here. But that is why the human race is seeing such a broad spectrum of adverse reactions, ranging from the acute heart attack within hours or minutes, anaphylaxis, heart attack within minutes, to heart attack within weeks, then to longer-term autoimmune reactions and other problems with various organ systems in the body, and then cancers. So these are the long-term, the chronic adverse reactions that we're starting to see. So we've shifted from the acute adverse reactions into the intermediate and long-term adverse reactions. And because of where the product goes in the body, everywhere, we're seeing almost everything that can go wrong.
Being that there's this spike protein's able to get past the blood-brain barrier, due to the vaccine and the way this thing is distributed. Has there been any research as to the type, any kind of neurological problems that are being caused by this?
Oh, neurological problems are one of the that's the second largest category of adverse reaction after the cardiovascular system injury.
Because I don't think we hear too much about that, but it sure seems like there's an uptick in mental health problems and neurological problems. And I'm curious as to,
Coordination problems,
Mhm.
demyelination problems, vestibular balance problems. It runs soup to nuts
Yeah.
because the stuff goes everywhere. And where it interacts in each individual is peculiar to that individual.
Right. So there's a different database within the military where they monitor, a lot of these types of things, the health of our service members. Is that database, is the data in there public? If not, is there a way to FOIA that? Do we know what the impact has been? I mean, like, is there data available as to how many service members have been put out for medical, compared to previous years, or is there any way for us to know how this has impacted the military?
Those studies could be done. The military has those data. So we're talking about the Defense Medical Surveillance System that basically has everything go into it. Your physical exam appointment, your lab results, your EKG, your x-rays, everything, and any diagnosis as a consequence of a medical appointment goes in
It seems
there.
to me that would be a great source of like a control, for seeing the impact of these vaccines, because there are
Sure.
there's a handful of soldiers, or service members that have not taken the vaccine. My son is one of them. He applied for a religious exemption and was granted that. There's a lot of people that were kicked out, incidentally, and it was really subjective depending on your command. But it seems to me that this would be an area where Congress could step in and demand there to be, a study based on that data, to really get to the bottom of this.
And you'd have to bring in outside people because you'd have to bring in outside people to do those studies. So there is another, as a practical matter, you cannot FOIA DMSS data.
Mm.
You would have to get the authorization to do the study, and then have somebody you trust do the study. There is a.
Is that because of HIPAA laws? I mean, couldn't they sanitize the personnel data files
But that's what yes, but you have to begin with fully identified data.
Okay.
You have to begin with that, and then you have to sterilize it after. So there is another database, the Defense Medical Epidemiology Database, which is more widely available and has been accessed by military whistleblowers. Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, Navy Lieutenant Mark Bashaw, Navy Lieutenant Grant Smith. I think Grant had access to those data. And they did data pulls, and they made a couple of mistakes. First, because the data in DMED, the Defense Medical Epidemiology Database, is anonymized. It's already sterilized.
Oh, okay.
You cannot identify individuals, but nevertheless, that does not mean it's useless. So if you query on a particular diagnosis code, atrial arrhythmias, and you plot it over time, what your poll represents is the aggregate demand for healthcare for that diagnosis. You don't know how many people. So what you see are appointments.
Right.
It does not tell you how many people are involved. It does
Could be
not,
the same person over and over again, right?
and it does not tell you who, right? Because one member can go back to see a doctor multiple times for the same condition. But what you see is the aggregate demand. And I looked at a large number of DMED data polls, mostly in the cardiovascular category, and a couple interestingly, from the musculoskeletal.
Mm.
And what they generally showed is, there were five comparison years, 5 baseline years prior to the vaccine. So 2016 to 2020. So 2020, that's the pandemic year. And then they compared them to 2021, the first vaccine year, and 2022, the second vaccine year. And for almost all of these diagnosis codes, what you saw was about a 25% increase in the aggregate demand for healthcare. Now, it's unreasonable to assume that people with a very consistent demand for healthcare, 2016 to 2020, for their atrial dysrhythmia, suddenly need 25% more appointments for the same condition in 2021 and 2022.
Well,
And
especially
interestingly, some of these codes, they increased. Not only did 2021 increase above all the baseline years, but 2022 sometimes accelerated above 2021.
That's interesting, and that's also that you have to take into account that this is a database of military members who generally are healthier than
Yes.
the average public, because they're regularly exercising. They have programs to make sure people are staying under their BMI and weight and all of that. And so you've got and they're people who have regular health care versus some American citizens that don't have access to healthcare at all. So this is that's kind of a shocking number,
Right.
when you take into consideration that does not include the elderly.
And so what the military has not done, which if they really wanted to put those ignorant, paranoid people's suspicions to rest, they would create a study that's rate based. You look at the anonymized data, you find individuals, you count individuals, and then you put them in the numerator, and then the active component population in the denominator, and you calculate a per 100,000 rate per year or per month or whatever timeline you want. And then, you compare that to equivalent condition, the rates of equivalent conditions in the general population. And not only that, we have the historical data, and we have year by year, population end strength data. So you could create an average, population, because the military population is always going up and down through the year. So you have to, you'd have to create an average, and then, you create rates. This is how we compare a given population at different times. And this is how we compare different populations at the same time. And you have to work in rates. They have not done this. And this cannot be an oversight. There are people that work for the Department of the Navy that I used to work for. They're just as smart as I am. They know how to do this. They're not doing it. Why?
Yeah, it doesn't. Well, let me ask. Most people are who are willing to take these vaccines, right? That done so. Many of them now, have buyer's remorse. Those that resisted these injections kind of feel vindicated now that they're seeing some of this data coming out. But very few people, even those who believed in them, are still getting the boosters. I mean, that's, the booster shots have dropped off for a lot of people. In fact, a lot of people I know that got the original injection have not gotten the boosters.
They're not doing it
Are there
anymore.
long-term consequences to the shots already delivered into people's arms, or are there, what do we see happening right now?
Yes. Well, as I said, we're moving into the long-term consequences of these, because people have, for people who have autoimmune reactions, they've been immunized against the normal components of their own cellular structures, their own tissues. And so the classic historical analogy is rheumatic heart disease. It's caused by common garden variety streptococcus infection. This is why we treat strep with antibiotics. This is because about 10% of strains, after your immune system spanks that little coccus, suddenly your heart valve looks like streptococcus, and the immune system then begins attacking the valve, and that's rheumatic heart disease. Mozart, we think, died of it. Anyway, once the immune system is trained on that target, you cannot turn it off. So once the injections have trained the immune system that some normal component of our body is foreign, the enemy must be destroyed.
That is essentially what an autoimmune disease is, right?
That is what an autoimmune disease is. And you cannot turn it off. You can treat it, you can mitigate it, you cannot turn it off. And in other conversations, I think I had shared with you that I have now cataloged from the papers I've read 7 separate mechanisms by which the gene injections either directly cause or promote cancer. Two of the 7 mechanisms are intranuclear, and the other 5 are either intracellular, outside of the nucleus, but inside the cell, or extracellular, in the system, working at large. 7 mechanisms. This is why we see turbo cancer. Like cancer in the elderly is almost usually a disease of many years before somebody succumbs to it. But what we're seeing is that people, elderly, they get their diagnosis of cancer in advanced stage, and then in a few months they're dead. That is not normal.
Yep. And then we're seeing, I think, the rate of age for people getting cancers beginning younger and younger too.
Yes,
which is unusual as well. We both signed the Declaration of Military Accountability. The document, folks, is available at militaryaccountability.net. The supporting petition that anybody can sign is now up to over 35,000 signatures, but we need many more. How would you the importance of the DMA to people to help them understand why it's important for this petition to be signed?
we want accountability. We want, for the guilty, we want retribution. Now, retribution is not revenge. Revenge is personal. Retribution is the result of a judicial process. The reason why the Declaration of Military Accountability is important is because the admirals and generals on active duty since the military vaccine mandate went into effect. They're all guilty of felonies. All you have to, all that is necessary is to prove in a court of law, here's the law. Did you do this? Did you order any subordinates to take this product? We simply show the product was not FDA approved in accordance with federal law. Conviction.
Yeah.
The
military conviction rate, with the court-martial process, it's a very judicious process, but it's not like our civilian courts where it takes a long time, to get through this. So I think this would be a good place to start, because there's already been a review of this, and it was found that this was illegal.
The admirals and generals are the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
See, our legal system leans very heavily on the twin principles of precedent and analogy. If we can show in a court of law that we don't need them all would be great. That may have to wait for Judgment Day, but some will do. Mm-hmm. If we can show in a court of law and get convictions for this illegal act, then precedent and analogy, CDC, FDA, corporate, because CDC and CDC hid the data, FDA hid other data. They waived their medico-legal wand improperly and without authorization from Congress. They exceeded their authority. They violated the law. They're guilty. From their springboard, corporate CEOs who either fired somebody for not taking the shot, mm-hmm. or who coerced an employee into taking the shot, and now the employee is either injured.
And coercion is also that is a felony as well. Coercion, that is where you basically force somebody to do something under duress. And that is exactly what happened when you're telling somebody you will lose your job, your livelihood, if you don't do this. I was working as a defense contractor, and I was told that if I did not get vaccinated, I would lose my job. Fortunately for me, I don't, I kind of react. I have a rebellious streak in me when somebody tells me that, when somebody threatens me, it just makes me, become more stubborn. And so when they told me I had to get vaccinated, I wrote a very long letter, to my supervisors, basically telling them to go pound sand and that I was leaving and starting my own company. So, it unfortunately, though, not everybody's in that position. There's some people that, like doctors and nurses that worked at hospitals. Where do they go? Especially if every hospital was doing that, right? So
state medical boards who have plenary power over a doctor's ability basically to make a living.
Yeah.
And they told doctors that if you distribute misinformation about COVID, we will suspend or revoke your license. And they have a plenary power. They can do it like that. And in fact, Dr. Merrill Nass in Maine, after testifying before the House Health and Human Services Committee, I believe it was, about her reservations about the gene injections and her, I think, clinical success in using hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, mm-hmm. had her license summarily suspended. And the state medical board in Maine told her that if she wanted her license back, she had to get a psychiatric exam. This is the weaponization of psychiatry, no different than what the Soviet Union did after Stalin's show trials.
Right.
So those people need to be in the dock as well.
We almost need another Nuremberg type trial. over this
We
stuff.
do.
I mean, it really is. It's a violation. In fact, the Nuremberg Code specifically addresses the issue of coercion.
Yes, it does.
And I think that many people within government positions and corporate positions, the CEOs, executive positions, I think are probably guilty, of coercion on a major scale. And I do think that there needs to be accountability. People need to go to jail. Some people probably, need to get capital punishment, especially those that were in the know, like Walensky, who knew that this would cause death and yet hid that information from the public.
But she's way down the road. So I'd like to jump back to the DMA and the petition.
Yes.
So the admirals and generals are the low-hanging fruit. The petition by itself will do nothing, especially with 35,000 signers. We need about 1 million. With 35,000 signers, that's less than, on average, that's less than 1,000 people per state. That is not going to get the attention of a politician, a finger in the wind politician.
Mm-hmm.
We need about 1 million. Now with 20,000 people on average in a state, now these finger in the wind politicians will begin to take notice. In the UK, when William Wilberforce campaigned for 20 years to campaign to end slavery and the British involvement in the slave trade, at first, he banged his head against the wall, but eventually he started to have a little success. And there were the more courageous avant-garde politicians who signed on. And then there were the less courageous, but, people that would say, yeah, me too. I want to join the side of morality also. And then finally, it became de rigueur. And the people who were not, the people flagged themselves by not joining the abolitionist movement. So it always starts, but we need pressure, and it needs to be focused. So we need people to sign that DMA petition.
So on that note, we got over 1,400 people right now live watching this show. I would want to encourage every single one of you that are watching the show to please go to militaryaccountability.net and sign the petition if you have not. And I would also request that you post, make a social media post about it to folks. You can link this video, to it, or you can just link the page and, and ask people. But imagine if everybody told 10 people and 10 people, 10 of your friends went and signed it. I mean, we would be well over 100,000, in very short order. And this is what we've got to do. This is important, folks, because, they're not done. Look, you got to understand that these globalist elites, and that's who's really behind this, that pushed for this. Remember, they tried to hide the fact that this was from gain of function research. They tried to hide the fact that they were doing this in a laboratory. I got to share something with everybody that's listening that is quite disturbing. I got a request for proposal. I'm a government contractor. And so I get these occasional, people reach out to me. Maybe they get a request for proposal for something that they know how to do, but there's certain pieces of it like cybersecurity that they don't know. And so they'll reach out to my company and say, hey, would you partner with me in doing a write-up on, for this part of it. So that's what happened to me. And somebody reached out to me about this RFP, and I read it. And I was shocked because what was in it was a request by our own government, and it was being funded by the Non-Proliferation Fund. Okay, interestingly enough, which you can always take whatever the government says and just take whatever they're saying and calling it, and just assume it's the opposite, right? It's like it's the Protect Marriage Act. It's the opposite. It's the Inflation Reduction Act. It's the opposite. Well, Non-Proliferation Fund. It's the opposite. what this thing was about was they were asking people to give inputs to a contract proposal for building up these biological laboratories in Chile. Okay. And they specifically stated two things that were kind of right off the bat were big warning flags to me. One, they said that they can operate and do things outside the law. This was actually in the RFP, outside the law, that other agencies can't do. The other thing that they said is that they have 0-day appropriations, meaning black budgets. Okay. They don't have to get it approved by Congress. And what they were asking for was they wanted to network all of these laboratories throughout Chile. This is US tax dollars, mind you, going to Chile to network all of these laboratories that are working with, they call them highly infectious diseases, and I think that was the term they used. But they wanted also protocols, they wanted the protocols to be designed that would lead to rapid, destruction of the facility, the rapid, cleansing and wiping it out and all of that. And they also wanted all the data to be connected between all these different labs. Now, I'm looking at this and I'm going, am I imagining this, or is this? And this is what it said, that this would be a pilot for what they intended to do all over the world. So, with all of our partners around the world, I think was the term they used. So remember when the Russians invaded the Ukraine, where did they go? They went to all these biological labs. It was one of the first things they did to shut down what they said were bioweapons programs. That was the claim made by, Russia. Well, they may not be far off from it, because I think that it looks to me, based off this RP, like we're doing stuff down in places like Chile and other parts of the world. And we're doing it out of our country because we can't do it here, because it would be illegal to do here. Mm-hmm. So these globalists, like I said, they're not done. They're going to come out with some other Frankenvirus. And we got to do what we can to hold these people accountable and to stop them. Remember, Bill Gates, he was one of the guys that was directly involved with him and George Soros. They bought the company that created the what was it, the test that the COVID test, the PC, what is it, the PCR or PCA? PCR test. They bought that company. They made, billions of dollars off of this pandemic. And if there's one thing that drives them, it is money, and they will do this again. But also there's something else that drives people like Bill Gates. And that is that they want to see a mass reduction in the population of the earth.
And that is what is behind all of it.
Yeah. He's made those comments publicly. Mm-hmm. He is flat out, that's what that is what the climate change initiative is all about. Mm-hmm. It's all about, basically saying human beings, it's an anti-human, program. Basically, they're saying human beings are a threat to the earth. So we need to wipe out, as many of them as we can through either killing them off, culling, the herd. I had Dr. Rima on just recently, and she, has exposed some stuff at the UN, where they say culling the useless eaters is what they call them. And she's done a lot of exposure of what they've done there at the UN, but they are also, that's why there's a push by these same people to, that's why they've been so big on pushing abortion. That's why they've been so big on pushing contraceptives. That's why they've been so big on pushing anything that would stop fertility. This is also one of the reasons I think they're pushing the transgender stuff as well and the LGBTQ agenda, because that doesn't produce more human beings. It's all about that. It's at the root of it all. They want to stop the production of, additional human beings. And the problem is that we're now below what is necessary to even sustain us. In many of these countries. That's why Germany has so much data on fertility, because it's a huge problem there. They pay $10,000, at least they used to. It's probably more now, but it was $10,000 per family to have a child. They were basically subsidizing people to have children, because they're social democrats, so they have a very high welfare state, and they can't sustain it off of the backs of those who aren't working. They need people who are working in order to sustain it. Well, we have moved into that category of being a welfare state as well. And so, we've got the same problem, coming at us with the retirement of the baby boomer generation. And, all of these people that are now not productive, not working, that are younger generations. And now that are also choosing not to get married, choosing not to have children. And then those that do want to have children seem to be having trouble doing it. The birth rate has dropped significantly. So Elon Musk has talked about this. So I think it's all tied together. So what can we see? I know you're keeping an eye on this stuff. Chris, what do you see as their next move? What are they working on?
Well, I think that we are already beginning to see it. So H5N1, avian flu, has been used as a pretext for culling chicken flocks recently. And I think I also saw that in the news that it had been detected in cattle, and they were culling herds. So there's an attack on the food supply.
Well, they're injecting cattle and pork with mRNA vaccines for COVID now.
Mm-hmm.
So how do they know that they haven't compromised the immune system of our cattle and of our pork, so that when they get exposed to that, it's not causing them death, right?
Yes. Sorry, we were having there's a cat getting into trouble. You're right. And ranchers had already shown a 10% increase in mortality in some of their herds for swine and cattle after introducing these products. They're not good for the health of anything. Gene therapy has always failed. It has always failed. There's just no good will ever come of this in any species. Ours, our food sources, anything.
Well, it's kind of the ultimate of playing God, if you will. They are modifying the very makeup, of God's creation. So I think we're moving into things where I've seen some videos and some talk about aerosolizing mRNA, putting it into our food, doing all kinds of things. I mean, it's like, when are we going to stop these people?
When citizens around the world wake up and begin to hold their elected representatives accountable.
Yeah.
And not until. And that is why the petition is so important. By itself, it does nothing. But with numbers, then we can use it as something tangible to point to pressure our politicians to take sensible action.
Well, I think the most effective, the most kind of, to me, most valuable thing about the DMA is that you have a very regimented process, for
Yes.
prosecution, and you have something tangible that you can do. Like, doesn't matter if some general retired, he can be recalled to be, court-martialed, and can have his pension stripped of him. That is
That's right.
effective, and that will wake people up, hopefully, so that they never again try this crap.
Right. Now, there's a hurdle, as you know.
Yeah,
We have to win the next election.
that's
And the
right.
president must appoint a SecDef and service secretaries with some backbones and some understanding of their general court-martial convening authority as SecDef and service secretaries. And because the defendants we'd like to see in the dock are all flag and general officers, the court-martial convening authority must outrank them.
Right.
And so the appointment of those people becomes critical. But once done, then it is purely a function of the military justice system. The Department of Justice is not involved. The president is not involved. And so he's immune to accusation of partisan politics.
Yeah. Well, Chris, we've gone a little bit over, but I think this is such important information. I don't mind, and clearly, we're up to almost 1,500 people here, so they haven't minded either, and the numbers have kept growing. But we do need to kind of close out this session, and I would love to have you on again to talk more about these things, and especially as new research comes out and this new data comes out, I'd love to have you on again to talk about that. Having coming from somebody that's that has a background in medicine is always helpful. Thank you for joining us. I want to give you the last word, and then I'll close out in prayer as I always do. But Chris, if there's a message, if there's one thing that you want people to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
We're in very dark times as a nation and as a world. There's always hope. It's going to be a long slog, but we can't give up. That is guarantee of failure. The other side wins. If we give up, the other side wins. But if we persevere, I think it was Payne Thomas said, the sunshine patriot, falls away, and the true patriot who loves his country soldiers on. And we need to hold these people accountable for what they've done. We need to bring them to justice. We need to twist the arms of our elected representatives to show them that they'll lose their job if they don't give us justice. But that takes numbers, and that takes citizen involvement. This is we the people. We are Caesar. And we have to begin to act like it. Anyway, I thank you. Nate and I both thank you all for your attention and indulgence. And all I can say is, please sign the petition, get in contact with your representatives, Senate and Congressmen, and encourage them, ask them, what do you know about the Declaration of Military Accountability? And what are you doing to bring justice and redress for these injuries and these wrongs? We need to right these wrongs. What are you doing? Ask them, because they need to be put on the spot.
Thank you. Folks, I always end in prayer, and the reason why is because I believe that, we can try and do our best to solve these problems, but without God's help, I believe that we will fail. It is a partnership that we have with God in these endeavors. And, we're facing a lot of these problems due to immorality, due to greed, due to, people just not caring about their fellow citizens. And I think that we need help. Our founders understood that. They called it providence, the secret hand of God that helped our nation to become a great nation. And, and I believe in providence as well. And so that's why I pray. But I also recognize that, faith without works is dead. If we're not doing our part, then we can't expect to see results. We got to do our part, but we also got to ask for divine assistance. I say we do what we can, and we ask God to do what we cannot do, which is to change the hearts and minds of people, to open those doors where, we can't seem to get open. So with that, I'm going to end us in prayer, and then we will close out the show. Heavenly Father, I thank you, Lord, for all of your blessings, Lord. I thank you for being blessed in a country where we have freedom of speech, Lord, where we can talk about these things, even with all of the censorship, Lord. I thank you, Lord, that we have platforms that we have, we can get this word out there, Lord. And thank you for, giving us the freedom to be able to talk about these things on X and Truth Social and other platforms, Lord, that do not censor us. Lord, I pray that you would please expose the truth on this topic. I pray that you would motivate people to sign the DMA, Lord, that you would help us to make that possible, Lord, to bring accountability to those in military leadership that broke the law, that committed felonies, that forced and coerced, our servants, our soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen that have laid down their lives for our country, Lord. I pray that you would bring justice for all of them, Lord, by bringing to justice those who have forced this gene editing bioweapon on all of these service members without informed consent and through coercion. And Lord, we pray that you would bring back liberty to our nation, that you would help restore our rights where they've been taken away. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Remember, folks, to please subscribe and like the show, and please let other people know about it. And, we will be on again on Saturday night at 9 p.m. I will be having another special guest, so please check out the show, and we'd be happy to see you guys there. Good night.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.